Howdy again. Greg Wilkinson with Hope from the Hearts of Montana. Today we'll be following up with Pastor Dave Collins in the series of The Price of the Pulpit. Missionary work is a really dangerous job, and it's a calling that only certain people can do. And today we'll be discussing some of those issues about what goes on in the missionary field, and possibly some of the subject matter may be delicate issues. And so just ahead of time, that it may not be suitable for all audiences, so viewer discretion may be advised. So we're going to go have a sit down with Dave. See you in a few. And we're back with Pastor Dave Collins for part 2 of The Price of the Pulpit. And we're sitting in his very nicely decorated office. And so I guess we'll just get right into this, if you're ready.
Yes.
So previously we had talked about how things were down in El Salvador, and we wanted to get back to the stories about this. So could you go back and tell us what it was like to live down in Central America, and specifically El Salvador?
Absolutely, Greg. Yes, I'd be glad to. But before I go into any story about that, I'd like the people to know that this is about the price that my family did pay, and that the price that they made to go down there. This is about the cost of taking up the cross and following Jesus. This is about obeying the last words that Jesus said and spoke to his disciples, go out to the ends of the earth and preach the gospel, spread it to the ends of the earth, and the gospel of hope that you'll find in the person of Jesus Christ. So it's more than just stories. We went to the mission field to a small village named, like we said, Chalatenango. But you have to know what this life was like. If you've seen anything on of any videos or on TV or anything of what El Salvador is like, and these gangs that are being deported back from our country even today, those are the kinds of people that my parents went to give them the good news of the gospel. And yeah, we don't want to get into any bloody stories, but you have to know that these gangs were some of the worst criminals, the worst criminal people in the world, and they lived in El Salvador, and that's where my grandparents begged my parents not to take me to live down there. But the majority of the people in these smaller villages were absolutely wonderful people, just wonderful, wonderful people. The problem was that they were either caught in religion or tradition or some kind of witchcraft performed by witch doctors, and they needed the hope of a savior. And that's where my father and mother were chosen to go from the Central American mission, with all the tremendous danger that came with it. My father was a very strong and courageous man. My mother was a courageous woman. I mentioned that we packed everything like accordions and lanterns and phonograph back on horses back into the country, further into the country in the mountains to further the gospel. So the point is that horses played a very important part of our lives down in that country. My father rode a light gray stallion named Grandote, meaning big and strong, when actually he was only about 900 pounds soaking wet. And so all the horses were small down there. My father was 5'11" and 200 pounds. So he looked kind of funny on this small horse. It was a neighbor's horse that my father borrowed. And Dad was wearing the horse out pretty good on the days that he went many miles back to villages to visit the people. Dad wore a big, I don't know if you've ever seen one, a taco palm straw hat that the cowboys wore, and a white shirt. I wish I had that picture of him today. We do have pictures of it, and we have movies. We have 9mm movies of everything I'm telling you, but my sisters have them and won't share them with me. So maybe one day they will. So one day when I was 4 years old, Dad told me there were going to be some horse training up in the mountains. We're going to go to this little village where the caballeros all brought in their horses to sell or to trade. My father didn't want to use the neighbor's horse so hard, so he threw me behind him, and we rode about 6 miles up into the country, up into the mountains to a big plateau where the horse trading was going on. There was about 60 horses there. My father picked out a sturdy, lime-backed buckskin stallion, and his name was Paquete, and he went back and forth on the price until he was able to buy him. You have to remember that they expected you to do that in those countries. They started about 10,000 pesos and end up with 800. That's just the way they deal. They start really high, come down to where it's normal. That's just the way they do things. So my father got that done, and we rode Grandote. He rode him. He led me on the new buckskin stallion all the way home that night in the dark. Meanwhile, I myself, I'd already noticed a little buckskin mare that was there. So I asked my father to take a look at her. Little did I know that he had gone over and made a deal with the cowboy already who owned the mare to go to his ranch and 2 weeks later to buy her and take her home just for me. So Dad threw me behind him again, this time on the buckskin stallion. We rode about 9 miles to a big ranch where the cowboy lived, and bought her. I rode her home, hanging onto her mane all the way home, excited about the whole thing. As we were traveling back through the countryside, we saw 2 stallions surrounded by mares fighting each other viciously. One stallion happened to be this golden palomino.
Wow. A horse fight.
Yeah, vicious one.
You also spoke to me and said that you had spent 3 years in the mountains of Guatemala at a boarding school for missionary kids, right?
Yes, that's right, Greg. After about a year that I rode that little mare all over the place, named Pimienta, meaning peppermint, I was sent to a boarding school in the mountains of Guatemala in this little village in the high mountains called Huehuetenango at the age of 5. And I wrote a short letter to my father with the help of my teacher, asking him if he would breed my little mare to that golden stallion that we had seen out in the country when we were coming home that day from the ranch. And I wrote that I was hoping for a golden colt like Trigger, Roy Rogers' famous golden stallion. I had seen movies of Roy Rogers and Trigger when we went home on what they call furlough. I don't know if you know what that's called, but it's called a furlough for missionaries, where you get to go home for a couple months. Well, Dad wrote me back and said that he would. So my father took that mare out into the country and turned her loose in the wild countryside with this golden stallion. The next year at the boarding school, my father wrote me a letter with a picture of that golden colt that was born. And that was going to help me get through the year in boarding school. But what happened next would break my heart. My father wrote me back 2 months later that the mission board was moving us to a city called Apatzingan, Mexico, quite a ways from where El Salvador was. And the bad news is that we would not be able to save the horses, would not be able to take any of our horses with us to the new mission field. So Daddy had to sell all the horses, and we moved to the city of Apatzingan, and I never got to see that golden colt. And those are just some of the sacrifices that, missionaries made, and missionaries' children made. We children also made sacrifices. Meanwhile, I remained pretty sad at boarding school that year. It suddenly became a chore just to be there. But we were kept busy. On Saturdays, the school would send us out, 2 kids at a time, one older and one younger, to go to the prison there in the village. They had a prison in the village there. And we would hand out tracts to the men in the prison. And if we did that, we could stop at the store on the way back and get a candy bar. Well, most of the time we were so scared to go into the prison itself that we just left the tracts under the door, knocked on the door, and ran. So, I'm not sure that it was a very effective ministry, at that time. So, such was the life of a missionary kid back then. 5 months at home, 7 months, many miles away from home and from our parents, beginning at 5 years old. And I got to say, it took a huge toll on most of the kids, a huge toll for the rest of their lives. So the price and the cost of following Jesus was not just paid by the parents, but also by the sacrifice made by the children in missionary families. So there was more to that than just the parents. The children also suffered.
Was there an incident very scary incident where you had fallen off a horse?
Yeah, the very first horse I rode at 4 years old, his name was Dookie, and Stone Streets. And I was riding him at a pretty good lope. My dad was standing there, and I took my rope and I leaned back and threw it to catch my dad, and lost my balance, fell off the back of the horse, hit on the cobblestone street, split my head open, and was conscious and unconscious for around 2 weeks. And that was a time, even though my dad was a courageous man, he was terrified over that. And it hit him hard. And he prayed. They couldn't take me home. It was miles and days away to America. And I was healed, and I think I'm still okay from that.
Thank the Lord, yeah. That would be a frightening thing in the back country and not have adequate medical treatment anywhere or close to you. So. Well, if you have anything else to add?
I've got some things I'd like to share next time with you.
Next time? Well, that means we're going to have a part 3. Well, Dave, thank you for your time again this morning and for sharing your warm house and your warm heart.
Thank you, Greg.
And
appreciate it.
All for the glory of the Lord.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
Okay.